Well, good morning, and thank you for joining us today for our second virtual workshop of the year. My name is Betty Galanter, and I'm the Voter Outreach Manager for the Maricopa County elections. We're really pleased to provide you election information directly to you, our Maricopa County voters. Now, today's topic is one of great interest with our residents, which is vote centers and the security features involved. But first, let me share my agenda with you. Today, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go to the Goodyear City Hall, which was a location from one of our vote centers during the 2022 general elections. Scott Jarrett, our Director of Elections, will show you what a voter can expect to find in a vote center and the election equipment, all that security features, so that you can see firsthand how Maricopa County elections are conducted safely, accurately, and securely. Now, Scott has been with the Maricopa County elections for about 4 years. He is a wealth of knowledge. He directs all of our department operations and implements strategic direction. He works closely with the county recorder and he reports to the Board of Supervisors. Next, we're going to have a Q&A session with Scott, moderated by our communications manager, Matt Roberts. So don't forget to submit your questions to us via chat at any time. Just type out the question and hit submit. We're going to try to answer as many questions as possible during our time together. And then finally, I am going to wrap up. But a few reminders: this presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube for future viewing. And to enhance our time together, please keep your cameras off and keep your mics on mute. Cart captioning is provided by Patty, and we have 2 American Sign Language interpreters today, Amy and Vanessa. So I'd like to welcome Patty, Amy, and Vanessa. Okay, so with that, I am going to turn it over to Scott.
Welcome, and thank you for attending our second virtual workshop. Our first was a couple months ago when we discussed all the layers of controls we had within our ballot tabulation center. Today, we're going to be bringing you into our vote centers. So if you'll follow me, I'll start with some of the controls we have on the outside of the vote center. And the first item is our 75-foot line. So our 75-foot line is a designator, and we have 3 of these signs outside of every location, at least 3, and away from the front entrance of the voting location. In statute, every voter is afforded the constitutional right to vote a secret ballot. Also, they're supposed to be able to vote without having anyone intimidate them or influence their vote. So one of the ways we do that is with this 75-foot line. So only a voter's assistants, or a voter's children may accompany them into the voting location. For us, a worker, you can only have an election official or a poll worker enter the voting location. And the others that are allowed to enter are appointees by the political parties, so those would be political party observers that can enter. Now there's 3 elements to the 75-foot line. The first is there's no photography, so that'd be photos or videography allowed within the voting location. But because we're in the middle of June, we're able to bring you into one of our mock elections. We've set this up just to invite you in to show you how our in-person voting operations work. The other is there's no weapons allowed within the 75-foot line and our voting location. The last is there's no electioneering allowed within our voting location. So what an electioneering is outside a 75 vote limit sign, candidates may be outside that are wanting to inform voters to vote for them. So they are actually allowed to do that outside that 75-foot line, but not within it. It may be others. They might set up a booth or a tent with collateral, with flyers that says vote for X question on the ballot, vote for X candidate. That can happen outside that 75-foot line, but not within it. Now, there are a few exceptions to that. So as an elections department, we're supposed to require and find locations that would allow for electioneering to occur. But there's some areas within Maricopa County that we might be short on voting locations. And in those instances, if we can't find a voting location that would allow for electioneering, then we are able to designate that as an emergency non-electioneering site. And in the 2022 general election, we had about 20 of those sites, so about 10% of our voting locations were non-electioneering sites. So here we are entering the voting location. One of the things I wanted to identify is, you might see in my hand, I have an early ballot. So about 84% of our voters in the 2022 general election voted with an early ballot. Just over 35% of those dropped off their early ballot at one of our voting locations. So if you are one of those voters, you do not have to stand in line. So at every one of our voting locations, we're going to have an early ballot drop box, and those voters can skip the line, take their early ballot, and drop it right in that early ballot drop box. So if you aren't an early ballot recipient and aren't bringing that to drop it off in a voting location, you're going to be checking in to our voting location. So we're going to have a few different individuals here to serve our voters. They're going to be our poll workers, and we have several different poll workers, and they serve in different roles. We're going to have an inspector who's the supervisor of the voting location. We're going to have a marshal that's going to be announcing the opening and closing of the voting location. We'll have various clerks serving in various capacities, and then we'll also have 2 judges working in the voting location. They usually work as the backup inspector, but they're also the individuals within the voting location that can be appointed by the political party county chairs. So, and that's an important note. And similar to what we discussed at our last virtual workshop, bipartisanship throughout the entire voting process. So we really value having highly partisan Republicans working right next to highly partisan Democrats. We value inviting party not declared voters, independent voters, libertarian voters into not only voting in the process, but serving our voters and working at our voting locations. So those judges are the ones that can be appointed by the county chairs. And when we went through our hiring efforts in November 2022, we were able to hire exactly 920 Democrats to work at our voting location, 920 Republicans to work at our voting locations, and just under 400 others. So that'd be libertarians, independents, or party not declared voters. So as a voter that's coming into our voting location, you're first gonna, one of our poll workers is gonna greet you in and then start you off with the process. And that's gonna start with checking into one of our site books. In statute, they're called e-poll books, but in Maricopa County, we call them our site books. So what the voter's gonna do is they're gonna be able to check themselves in. So if you think of your supermarkets, your banks, or other entities, they're all implementing these self-service kiosks. And we've done that in our voting location, but only to a point. So what a voter would do is they're gonna touch their screen, and now it's gonna ask them to touch the type of ID that they brought with them today to be able to check in. So, and we do have, so if they didn't bring a scannable ID, we do have a manual search option that they can enter the information. But today I did bring a scannable ID. So I'm gonna touch the Arizona driver's license. And then it's gonna ask me to scan the barcode from driver's license. So we're gonna scan that. It's gonna search our records. Now this is our training database. So it's gonna pull up Mary Test. So, and it's gonna ask me, is this my current name? So in our training database, I am Mary Test voter today. So I'm gonna say yes, and this is my birthday. So I'm gonna proceed. One of the requirements to be able to vote is that we verify and attest that this is my current address. So I'm going to read this and say, okay, is this my current address, 510 South 3rd Avenue in Phoenix, Arizona? So I'd say yes. And it allows me to progress, and I said up to a certain point. It's going to have me sign. So Mary, test, and continue. And then it's not going to let me progress any further. It's going to require that I show my identification to a poll worker. So the poll worker is going to come, and how we restrict this is through a badge. So this badge access, we're going to have our judge scan that in. Now I'm going to need to then take my ID and hand it to the judge, who's going to verify, does the address match my name, and does it match the ID that I provided? If it does, then it's going to ask the poll worker to select which type of ID. For the vast majority of voters, probably about 90 to 95% of our voters, they're going to bring in a driver's license that matches their ID. So that's what we'll select here. But there are other options. We have our website. If you just go to locations.maricopa.vote or maricopa.vote, you can find what type of ID is allowed for a voter. So if they don't have a driver's license that has their current ID, they can bring in their voter registration card. It could even be a digital card. They can look it up on beballotready.vote, and then we find that digital card and issue them a standard ballot, not a conditional ballot. So we'll go ahead and continue. And now, since I've provided sufficient ID, an ID that matched the check-in roster, I'm able to print a ballot. I did want to highlight we get a lot of questions about passports and military IDs and whether that is sufficient ID. And that would not be, because neither of those have an address. However, what a voter could use, and those would be considered list 3 items in state statute, the voter then could use a utility bill that's been issued within the last 90 days. They can use their voter registration card. They could go to Be Ballot Ready. And those in conjunction with each other would then be sufficient ID. So after you check in, as a voter, you'd come to our clerk station where they would then retrieve their ballots. So you'd come to this station, and our ballot on demand printers are going to print a few different items. So if you are voting early, it's going to print a early ballot affidavit envelope, because that's how that voter will, after they complete their ballot, they're going to insert it into that affidavit envelope. And then that would then be returned to our central count facility to be counted. If it's a provisional ballot, we'd print that provisional ballot affidavit envelope. The voter then would sign that, and then that would go to the recorder's office to be researched, to be determined if that provisional ballot could be counted. It's also going to print a couple other items.
Mr. Mary Test Voter.
So I'm being issued my ballot along with a control slip. So the poll worker would actually keep this. They're handing it to me for demonstration purposes. But this control slip's going to have my name, Mr. Mary A. Test, voter, and it's going to have a code. So this code is unique to the precinct in which I live. So in Maricopa County, we have 935 different precincts, and all the voters in a general election would have the exact same ballot style. In an August primary election, then I would have, for my designated party, the exact same ballot style for that precinct for every member of that registered party that I'm associated with. And that'd be the same with, so you'd have a different ballot style for a Republican, different ballot style for a Democrat, different ballot style for a Libertarian, or if you're going to have a nonpartisan ballot, you only want to vote for the city or town contests within that precinct. So, but it's these codes that we use to marry those two up together. So I would then be issued this ballot. So in an August primary, we have upwards of 18,000 different ballot styles. In a November general election, we have upwards of 12,000 ballot styles. And so it's our site book check-in station that we just showed and this ballot on demand technology that allows us to create a vote center model. And one of the advantages of a vote center model is that it reduces provisional ballots significantly. Our site books also allow voters to change their name. So if they modified their name during that voting period and they got a new ID and they needed to update it, they can update it in real time using our check-in stations. Also, if a voter moved during the election cycle, they can also update their address. If they bring in sufficient identification, that address can be updated in our site book technology, and that would prevent them from voting provisional ballots. So in 2012, about 10 years ago, we had over 120,000 provisional ballots that were issued to voters. In this last election, November 2022, we had brought that down to just under 8,000 total provisional ballots. And the vast majority of those voters were not registered to vote. They had either registered after the voter registration deadline, they were too young to be able to participate, or they were not registered at all within our voter registration system. So the next step of the voting process is for the voter to complete their ballot. So I'm going to show that to you in just a second. However, within every one of our voting locations, we have a accessible voting device. So this would serve a voter if they have a disability and wanted to participate without the assistance of another voter or someone they brought in to assist them through the voting process. We're not going to go into detail on this today. We're going to have another virtual workshop where we'll cover all the different options that a voter could use if they had a disability and wanted to participate in the process. So I'm going to go over to one of our voting booths, and there's a few items I wanted to highlight. So here in our voting booth, you can see we have these privacy screens. So again, this is related to a voter has a constitutional right to be able to cast their ballot in secret, right? So we add these privacy screens. We also have these instructions in the voting booth, which guide a voter for how they can complete their ballot. So you can see in these ovals, it talks about something called an overvote. It also talks about if you make a mistake, what you can do, and how to complete the oval completely. So, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So in every one of our voting booths, we provide a pen, and it's a felt tip pen. And we prefer that voters use this felt tip pen for a couple of reasons. One is the felt tip pen is a little bit thicker than other types of pens. And so that makes when you're voting it much easier and faster for you to actually fill in the oval completely, as opposed to like a ballpoint pen, which might have a very thin writing utensil. And if you think about using a ballpoint pen, and for like the November 2022 general election, we had over 80 contests on the ballot. So as you go through that process and you're filling in every single oval, that could take a lot of time. And then sometimes voters then choose, instead of filling in those ovals, to then use check marks or X's, which allows them to fill out the ballot a little bit quicker, but that could create an issue later on in the voting process, like when they're feeding their ballot in through the tabulator. So I've brought an example of a ballot that has been completed using a ballpoint pen and check marks. And you can see sometimes that when a voter would fill in that oval with only a very small percent of that oval being filled in, it could result in then our tabulator reading it as an ambiguous mark. Or our tabulation equipment is incredibly smart. So it's going to recognize that that's an ambiguous mark, and it's going to recognize all the different contests that are ambiguous marks, and it's going to inform the voter when they insert that ballot into the tabulator which contests that they're showing that aren't completed sufficiently. But then that's going to require the voter to take another step. They're either going to have to take that ballot and have it backed out of the tabulator, returned to them, so that they can then make a choice on whether to spoil this ballot, check in again and issue a new one, or take this ballot back to the voting booth and fill in the oval completely, so then it can be read and counted as a vote in our precinct-based tabulator. And that's actually going to be our next stop, is to go and demonstrate our on-site precinct-based tabulators. So before we insert a few ballots and we demonstrate how the tabulator reads those ballots, did want to highlight a few items and the security related to the tabulation equipment. So first off, before every election, right, our tabulation equipment, well, not before every election, just in general, our tabulation equipment has to go through a federal certification process. So that's the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission that certifies all of our tabulation equipment as being secure, reliable, and accurate. The Secretary of State also then performs a certification of our tabulation equipment. This is both for our central count tabulation equipment as well as our on-site tabulators at our voting locations. Other controls and security related to our tabulation equipment is every tabulator, in order to be able to use it, will have a very specific password that's unique to each election. And we program that before the election and before we send our tabulation equipment through logic and accuracy tests. There's also a security key that gets assigned, and it's, again, election specific, that must be affixed to the equipment, and then a unique password entered into the equipment for the tabulation equipment to be used. And before every election, and before election day, we'll have our poll workers take their password, the security key, and what we call a precinct ballot report. So we prepare these at the Elections Department. They're called these precinct ballot reports when we're completing the logic and accuracy tests and post those few days after the logic and accuracy test, we're affixing those seals. And what we're going to ask the poll workers to do is verify that they have the right equipment. So this is usually the night before Election Day. So they're going to make sure it's the mock general election, make sure that the label on the machine is the mock general election. And then we're going to ask them to verify all the seals that are affixed to the tabulation equipment and that they match what's on the precinct ballot report. So I'm going to just show you an example. So this first seal right here will say our poll worker door. So this is our poll worker door. Here's the tamper evidence seal, right? And there's a number across here. That number is RS2014922. So that number should match this, which it does, RS2014922. They match. So our poll workers will go through and verify every single one of these serial numbers. We only have one tabulator here today, but most voting locations will have two, and that they match precisely and exactly. Then, before they start tabulating ballots on Election Day, they're going to run a zero report. So they're going to use their security token, their password, they're going to log in, and they're going to run, before any ballots are tabulated, this zero report. And it's going to show every single contest on the ballot and the number of ballots that have been tallied for that contest and the number of votes for those candidates as well. And it should be zero. And then there's going to be a space for the inspector and the judges to sign that information. They're also going to log that on their precinct-based ballot report. So those are some of the controls we have related to our tabulation equipment. Now we're going to show and demonstrate the tabulating a few ballots. So this is an example of a ballot that all the ovals have been filled in completely and there's no overvotes, ambiguous marks, or other types of issues. So what a voter would do is that after they filled out their ballot in the voting booth, they'd come to the tabulator, right? And it's important, this is not our poll workers. Our poll workers are instructed not to look at a voter's ballot, but to have the voter insert the ballot themselves and insert that in the tabulator. So this is an example of, again, that ballot. All the ovals were completed correctly. There was no overvotes. There wasn't a completely blank ballot. So it read and was dropped into the ballot box. And then there was a little check mark that read afterwards that said your ballot was cast. So that's how a voter knows that their ballot was cast and all the votes were tallied accurately. But there could be situations where a voter would vote an overvote. So what is an overvote? That's a situation where we might have a vote for one, right? So a contest with, you're only supposed to vote for one, and the voter fills in two ovals next to two different candidates. So that would constitute an overvote. So we're going to show you what that would look like if a voter did that in our voting location. And again, our tabulation equipment is smart enough to notice and identify that situation. So we'll insert that ballot. Right, and here, so as we'd train our poll workers, would then say, oh, the tabulation equipment has alerted us that there's an issue with the ballot. So then we'd have the poll workers inform the voter, please read the screen. So here the screen is alerting the voter that they've filled in too many ovals in one contest and which contest it is, the presidential electors. And then the poll workers would say there's more information if they scroll down, so the voter would then select the scroll down button. They can read the entire message. So now the voter has a choice to make. They can either choose to cast the ballot by hitting this or selecting that green button, or return the ballot to look at the ballot to see if they truly did overvote. Most voters usually choose to at least return it and see. So then it return that ballot. The voter would be able to look and say, yep, I truly did overvote that contest. Now they have the option at this point in time to either spoil this ballot, check in, get a new ballot, and re-vote the ballot, or to cast the ballot as is. So if they decided, oh, I'm okay with overvoting this contest, I'm going to go ahead and back insert it. Tabulation equipment will alert them again, right, that they've overvoted that contest. But in this case, then the voter would say, I'm aware of that. I'm going to go ahead and cast. Again, it's the voter that's pressing these buttons, not the poll worker. So that ballot's cast successfully. Next type of situation may be a completely blank ballot. So, and believe it or not, there are instances where voters do vote completely blank ballots, but there's also instances where a voter might circle each of the ovals instead of filling them in, and that would also then register as a blank ballot. So that's why we program our tabulation equipment to alert the voter if there is a blank ballot. So this was what that would look like. Right, so here our tabulation equipment has identified that none of the ovals are completed on the ballot, alerting the voter that they have a blank ballot. There's a message that they can read, and then the voter would have the option either cast or return. So if the voter returns it, they can look and review the ballot and say, yep, I did not vote for anyone, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to go ahead and recast the ballot. So they reinsert it. And then, again, the voter would then make the selection to return or cast. They choose to cast, and it's cast, but as none of the ovals were counted for that ballot. Now, there could be other situations why a ballot would be misread by the tabulator, and this ballot will show you some of those examples. So here we're going to insert it. So here's an example of the tabulator misreading a ballot. Now, how we train our poll workers to handle this, again, we ask them not to look at the voter's ballot because that then could divulge how that voter voted. But what we would ask our poll workers to do is ask the voter, well, let's attempt to reinsert this ballot. But since we inserted it first, face up, head first, now let's try face up, feet first. So then the voter would insert, and it would misread again. Right, and we would ask for every type of ballot that is being misread that our poll workers guide the voter to try this at least 4 times. So they'd try it head face up, head first, face up, feet first, face down, head first. And again, this is the ballot being misread. So, and there could be various reasons why a ballot would be misread. One would be, right, we talked about checkmark votes. Sometimes when voters are voting a ballot, they fill it out, and that line of the vote, that check mark, would then go into one of the timing marks, and this would cause a misread. Other times it could be our printers are running low on toner, right? And so in the timing marks, our printers would then have this smudging occurring, and then that would require us to then replace the toner so that wouldn't happen any further, and then allow those ballots to be misread. So here again, a voter has a decision to make. The voter can spoil this ballot, check in, and then vote a new ballot that can be read by the tabulator, or they can choose to put this ballot into what we call secure door number 3 and drop it in. And if they choose to do that, then we have a process to ensure that that ballot gets counted. Now, our secure door number 3 did make the news in the November 2022 election, and it was because some voters had some concerns about this door number 3. I wanted to give you a little bit of history. So since Maricopa County has been using on-site tabulators, which has been since the 90s, for nearly 3 decades, we've always used a door number 3. Because in every election, we understand that there can be situations when these on-site tabulators may not work. There could be a situation, right, we go out and do inspections of all of our voting locations before we use them. Those are ADA compliance inspections. But we also check for power. But there could be a situation where when we did the inspection, the power worked fine. When we set it up on a voting location, the power is no longer working where our tabulators plugged into. We try a few other different outlets. It's still not working. We need to then work with the facility to get that power restored. Well, in the meantime, we might not have any of our tabulation equipment working. So all those voters then would be inserting their ballots into the misread ballots, because we can't expect them to stay on site until we get that power restored. So that's just one example and why we've always used this door number 3. The other thing I wanted to highlight, so in Arizona there's 15 total counties. And 8 of the counties within Arizona don't use an on-site tabulator at all. So the only option that those voters have is to insert their ballots into something very similar to door number 3, but a ballot box, then have those ballots brought back to their central count facility and counted. In the other counties, the 6 others, right, Maricopa County being the 7th for the total of the 15, they will have a very similar redundant process in case one of their on-site tabulators isn't working, something similar to this door number 3. Again, this is a ballot box. Every ballot that would go into this that was a misread ballot would then come back to our central count facility to be tabulated. I'm going to describe how that would happen. So first, at the end of the night, so we're going to have our poll workers complete this precinct ballot report. And so they're going to take out the ballots out of the secure door number 3. They're going to log on this precinct ballot report the number of ballots. So we had one ballot that was logged on the precinct ballot report as a misread ballot. They'll log that information here. They're then going to open up using the key, the secure door. They would then take out the ballot. They would then insert that ballot into this misread envelope, which would then show the voting location where that's coming from. In this case, it's our mock general election. And then they would also log the number of misread ballots that are in that door and what they're placing into this envelope. So then they'd take that ballot out of that door, they'd place that ballot into this envelope, and then the poll workers, the 2 judges, those that are appointed by the county chairs, and the inspector would then seal this envelope, and then that would be returned to the central count facility along with our precinct ballot report. Now we would then need to determine whether we should count these ballots or not. So we would do our post-election audit analysis, so that we would do a download from our check-in stations of all the voters that checked in. We'd summarize the number of voters that were checked in and then compare that to the number of ballots that were tabulated and read in as part of our election night reporting results. So for example, if we had 981 voters check in at our voting location, and we ran that post-election audit analysis, and we identified that there were 980 ballots that we reported, then we would go through and we'd look at this information, our precinct ballot report, our misread envelope, and we'd find that we had 1 ballot short. So at that point in time, we would then take that ballot, we would, with our audit board, under the observation of the political party observers, we'd unseal this envelope, would take out those ballots, and then we would tabulate them, and we have a way to then tabulate and associate them back to this voting location. So that's how we ensure we have a complete accounting of every ballot that was voted at our voting locations. So the last thing I wanted to highlight for you all is how we bring back all of the ballots on election night. So here is our black canvas bag. And this black canvas bag also created some news on election night, because we were hearing stories about, the county's bringing back ballots in black bags. Then it turned to the county's bringing back ballots in black trash bags. And that's just not true. These are our very secure black canvas bags. They're perfectly sized for a stack of ballots, and we can fit well over 1,000 in each bag. When we open up our ballot box at the end of the night, we'll pull all those ballots in, we'll insert them into this black canvas bag, then we will affix it with a tamper-evident seal that has a serial number. Our poll workers will then log that serial number on this report, and then when they all come back to our central count facility, we'll verify that these numbers are matching. Right, and that's how we ensure that we have complete chain of custody of the ballots from the voting location back to our central count facility. And the last thing would be, if they're not going directly to our central count facility, they may be going to one of our receiving sites. So those would be a site that we have county employees, bipartisan teams accepting those items from a bipartisan team of poll workers that's appointed by the inspector to deliver those items to that receiving site. We'll also have Maricopa County Sheriff's deputies present at those voting locations. And then we'll create this, another chain of custody document that will list all the different items that those poll workers are transferring to our staff members at that receiving site. They sign that off. We give each of the 2 poll workers one of these forms, and then we take the top form for our records at Central Count Facility. So that's how all those items then are returned back to Central Count, and we maintain that chain of custody over every item. So with that, I hope you did learn some items and some things related to our in-person voting operations. And now I'm going to head back to our Central Count Facility and answer some of your questions.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. That was a lot of great information. And we hope that some of your questions were answered. But now we have time for some more questions. So I'm going to turn it over to Scott and Nat, and we'll go through our Q&A session right now.
Well, Scott, you made terrific time coming back from so welcome back to Central Phoenix. One of the questions we saw go by and we received in the past as well was about, you kind of covered it a little bit when it came to door 3. And the reason why people were using door 3 was that there was an issue with our printers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So that was one of the reasons why voters were using door 3. As I explained in our video, there could be various reasons. Could be that the power was out at the voting location. But yes, we did have in November 2022 a issue with some of our printers at, again, some of our voting locations. And that did create a less than ideal voting experience for some of those voters. But it's important to note that every one of those voters did have the opportunity to cast those ballots. And when they were placed into our secure door number 3, they were brought back to our Central Count Facility to be counted, as I described in the video. But that was caused because of 5 different issues, or 5 overlapping different issues. And the Board of Supervisors really wanted to get to the bottom of this. I wanted to get to the bottom of this. So we hired an independent investigator to come and tell us what happened. And so then we can take that information to prevent it from happening again in the future. So we hired, the county hired Justice McGregor to come and do a review of that issue. And through that review, she identified really 5 overlapping things that caused the situation. The first was the thicker ballot paper that we're using in the 2022 cycle. So in the 2020 cycle, we used an 80-pound paper. In 2022, we used a 100-pound paper. And the reason we chose to go this route was shortly after the 2020 election cycle, there's some legislation being considered that was going to require 0 bleed through to occur on a ballot. So we mentioned our felt tip pens. Those felt tip pens, not only did they help the voter fill in the oval a little bit quicker, but they also could they also don't smudge as much when the ballots are going through the tabulator, because that ink really gets absorbed into the ballot. But that could create a bleed through onto the other side of the ballot. Well, we program our ballots to be offset so that wouldn't affect the counting of the ballot themselves, but it could be less than ideal for the customer or the voter themselves when they see that ballot a little bit disconcerting. So we created that thicker paper. We used that throughout all of 2022, including the August primary. Also, another contributing factor was the longer ballot itself. So we usually used a 19-inch ballot. In the November general election, we had an average of 85 contests on the ballot. In late August is when they finalized all the questions that would go to the ballot as well. So that's after the August primary. And that, once we designed our first iteration of the ballot, we realized it wouldn't fit on our standard 19-inch ballot for the August primary. So we had to expand that to be 20 inches. That left us a couple days to do a lot of stress testing to identify, would this ballot be able to be printed using our printers, as well as then tabulated in our central count facility or on site at our voting locations. So we did that stress testing and we didn't find really any issues. That brings us to the third contributing factor, which was when we did our stress testing, right, we went through and tried to see, okay, if we ran a lot of ballots, these longer ballots, these thicker ballots through our printers, would that create a variance or a challenge for the printers? What we didn't do was use interval type printing. So when we're printing at our voting locations, we mentioned we're printing the control slip, we're printing a provisional ballot affidavit envelope, and we're printing the ballot itself. And each of those have different heat settings. So it was the fluctuation in the different heat settings was causing the timing marks on our ballot. So when I was showing those ballots at the voting location, those little black marks that are on the side, those are the timing marks. So some of those were not printing dark enough or consistently. There's a few of our voters that had like speckled timing marks. And that's just because the printer wasn't heating up enough to have those timing marks fuse with the paper, right? And then stick to the paper. So that was 3 of the issues. The 2 other issues was the on-site tabulator itself. So when we brought all those ballots back from door number 3, they all read through our central count tabulator pretty much fine. So it was that combination of those lighter timing marks with our on-site tabulators. And then it's one of our smaller printers that was also one of the contributing factors. We have much more larger, robust printers in our voting locations. This wasn't happening with those. So it was those 5 overlapping issues that caused that. We're currently going through, after the Justice McGregor did that analysis, we're going through and looking at stress testing some ballots because there's the new no labels party that could cause our ballot to be even longer. So up to 22 inches versus 20. And then I doubt we'll be using those smaller printers in the future, looking to replace them with those more robust printers.
I know that there's some more information on the website. There's even, I believe, Justice McGregor's report and some information on just the facts that helps people better understand what occurred, and look forward to 2024. Couple of questions. We'll kind of go through some of these rapid fire that we got. If I arrive at a vote center on election day at 7 or shortly before, and the line is around the corner, can I still vote?
Yes, you can. So as long as you make that line right before that 7 p.m. Deadline, you can vote. What we do is we send out the marshal to stand at that end of the line at 7 p.m. So if you entered the line afterwards, you would not be. You've entered that line after that deadline. Now, it is important to note, and we demonstrated our Sitebook check-in stations. Our voters are updating wait times frequently on the number of voters that can stand in line, or the number of voters that are standing in line. The one thing that I heard frequently too is, oh, I saw 100 voters or approximately 100 voters standing in line at our voting locations. And because we have our base model is 8 check-in stations, that can really get through. And then when we analyze our voting locations to find, okay, where those bottlenecks would be. So then when we have 8 check-in stations, we'll have upwards of 25 different voting booths to really keep and minimize those bottlenecks. So really that wait time when it's about 100 people is about 10 minutes in line that voters would be waiting to get their ballot. And then it'd take them another maybe 10 minutes to fill out their ballot.
Well, the next question is kind of related to that, related to the Sitebook and people checking in, related to ID. We have questions oftentimes about what kind of IDs can people be prepared for arriving to the Sitebook and checking in without any problem.
So for a robust list, I would go to getid.maricopa.vote or go to our website and maricopa.vote, and there's a list. You can go to the voting tab and look up the ID page. For the vast majority of voters, they're going to bring in a government issued ID. So that's like a driver's license with a photo that matches their current address, and that's going to be sufficient. But some other voters, maybe their address is their former address. They'll need something in addition. So that could be a voter registration card. They can go to Be Ballot Ready, get their digital card. They can bring in a utility bill that's been issued within the last 90 days. But for a complete list, go to our website.
Saw on the video that you were in the Goodyear City Hall, one of our locations, I believe. One of the questions was related to how do you go about choosing your vote centers?
Yeah, so we start opening up voting locations 27 days before Election Day. That's based on state statute. Really, those early voting locations are city and town clerk's offices because they don't charge us rent. Also, they're geographically dispersed throughout the county. So that provides a lot of great coverage. Then we go through and we do analysis. We call those our heat maps, looking for where those in-person voters are likely, where they live, and those ones that are likely to vote in person based on prior elections. We use that data then to fill in the gaps for all those other voting locations that we'll use through the rest of early voting period on election day itself. But there are sometimes we want a voting location right in this specific spot. And we go and we send out our facilities acquisition team, and all we find is houses, right? Which wouldn't make an ideal location. So then we expand that research out a little bit broader, and we'll find a church, we'll find a school or some other location that's willing to serve.
Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have. And we thank you for yours, and we'll throw it back upstairs to Betty.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Scott and Nat. That is all the time that we have today, but we hope you found our time together very beneficial. Remember, you can view this and any of our previous virtual workshops by going to youtube.com/Maricopa Vote. Now there you're going to find all of our video shorts, our election connections hosted by our co-elections director, Scott and Ray, and a variety of election topics hosted by our very own mascot, Bill the Ballot. Now, our next workshop will be held in August when we're going to talk about accessible voting and our special election board services provided for voters who want and need voting assistance due to a physical disability or confining illness. So remember, if you want to stay informed, go to our website, elections.maricopa.gov. If you want to stay informed, you can also subscribe to our monthly Just the Facts newsletter. Just go to justthefacts.vote. And last, I always encourage you to go to beballotready.vote because this is where you can view your personalized voter dashboard. It is your one-stop shop for all things elections. And we do want to hear from you. So I'm going to send you a survey card, and if you would kindly take a moment to fill it out and let us know how we're doing. We value your opinion. So join us next time on August 16th for our third virtual workshop on accessible voting. And a special thanks to Scott and Matt and to all of our elections team members behind the scenes who helped make this workshop possible. And so from all of us at the Maricopa County Elections, thank you for attending and have a great day.